Tonight, we'll take a look back at the best of our gun discussions. Obama pushes out new gun control measures while new studies show restricting guns doesn't make a lick of difference. We'll break down the findings and ask, when will politicians learn? Pixels for pistols, trading in guns for cheap, crappy cameras. We've got the details on an imbecilic plan to disarm law-abiding citizens. A victory for gun rights advocates in Colorado, and maybe there's still hope for us here in Canada. And Starbucks starts a grande gun flap. It's the best of Byline, the best of guns. This is Byline. Hello and welcome to a special Byline. From Obama gun control to the RCMP targeting legal gun owners here at home, we've broken it all down this past year. Tonight, we're taking a look back at the best of our gun conversations, starting with one of the leading gun control experts, John Lott. Gun control and the facts. That is the topic of tonight's Byline. It was the first day of school earlier this week for the children of Newtown, Connecticut. Newtown, of course, is the site of the mass shooting last December that shocked America and much of the world. Since the shooting, there have been repeated calls from activists and lawmakers around the world for greater, stricter gun control. The Obama administration moved forward today with two new regulations on gun control, even as a recently released study commissioned by President Obama himself showed that further gun controls will not have the impact that advocates claim they will. The new regulations come in the form of executive orders. These are simply orders given by the president, not passed by Congress. Why? Because the Obama administration knows they can't get the gun control votes they want via Congress. So if they can't get the votes, they'll issue orders. Tougher to challenge, no need for that pesky democracy. The last time President Obama issued executive orders on gun control was back in January in the wake of the Newtown shooting. One of those orders was directed at the Centers for Disease Control. It said the Secretary of Health and Human Services, through the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and other scientific agencies within the Department of Health and Human Services, shall conduct or sponsor research into the causes of gun violence and the ways to prevent it. And what did their initial report find? You cannot connect gun restrictions to any drop in gun violence. Quote, whether gun restrictions reduce firearm-related violence is an unresolved issue. In fact, much of what is claimed throughout the study is that there's simply not enough evidence to draw conclusions. Well, a favorite of those that want guns off the streets, and most people do, is the gun buyback program. Turn in your guns to the cops, get cash, no questions asked. The idea is this will take the illegal guns off the streets, the ones used in crime. It'll make cities safer. Not so. Page 44 of the report, there is empirical evidence that gun turn-in programs are ineffective. Next page, page 45, it reads, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, for example, guns recovered in the buyback were not the same guns as those most often used in homicides and suicides. Have you heard of this study? Have you heard that the Exalted Centers for Disease Control was asked to study gun violence and issued a report saying there's no evidence restrictions work in reducing gun violence? Probably not, because this study was issued in June, but it's received very little attention until the last couple of weeks. Now, some of you will be saying, oh, well, look, this is an American study related to an American story, so of course we wouldn't hear about it up here in Canada. Funny, we heard about the Sandy Hook shooting here. We heard about the nonstop calls for more gun restrictions, and Canadian politicians and pundits even used the shooting to back more gun control here. So this study came about as a result of that shooting, yet you didn't hear about it. You know that you would hear about it. You'd hear about it nonstop if it said more gun control was needed and the answer. Now, the second study I want to tell you about, a paper really, it comes from the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. Came out a few years ago, but it's getting attention now in right-wing media in the States. It looked at global murder rates and global firearms ownership. And it concludes that banning firearms, taking guns away from people, will not mean less violence or less gun crime. Researchers Gary Mauser, he's a friend of this program, and Don B. Cates from San Francisco, well, they point to murder rates in the old Soviet Union, where gun ownership was banned and few had guns, legal or illegal. Quote, yet manifest success in keeping its people disarmed did not prevent the Soviet Union from having far and away the highest murder rate in the developed world. In the 60s and early 70s, the gunless Soviet Union's murder rates paralleled or exceeded, or generally exceeded, those of gun-ridden America. What would happen after the fall of the Soviet Union? Even without gun ownership in Russia, their murder rate would soar to nearly 4 times that of the United States by 2004. Have you heard this story? Have you heard of this paper? It was co-written by a Canadian, yet our gun control-obsessed media outlets on both sides of the border, let's just ignore these sorts of things. They were quick to post stories, by the way, about Obama's new gun measures today. The Toronto Star even quick to get video of Joe Biden up on its website. And if you ask me, normally Joe Biden videos, those are only used by late-night comedians on TV. The gun debate, like so many others, is one where facts and common sense are on one side, the media and liberal establishment are on the other. And you need to read up, study, do your homework, and be prepared to fight back with real facts. And that's the byline.
We may not be able to prevent every massacre or random shooting. No law or set of laws can keep our children completely safe. But if there's even one thing we can do, if there's just one life we can save, we've got an obligation to try.
John Law joins us now to talk more about this. Of course, no stranger to this program or this station. John, a professor of economics, a writer of many books, including More Guns, Less Crime. John, let's start with the CDC. That's the new one. That's the one the Obama administration commissioned in the wake of the Sandy Hook shooting. It says, look, we can't connect this. We don't have enough information. What's your initial reaction to that? Is that an admission that gun control measures don't generally work, or are they just fishing for more money, for more studies?
Well, I think it's both. I mean, there have been hundreds of studies. There was a National Academy of Science report that was done in the United States in 2004. They looked at several hundred academic peer-reviewed studies, as well as something like about almost 100 books that have been written on the subject. Worldwide data. And this CDC studies also looks at data from around the world. And whether you look at assault weapons bans or gun buybacks or magazine clip limit sizes or a whole range of different things, background checks even, they couldn't find evidence that those types of rules had helped in any way in reducing crime rates. And the second point of your comment's also right, and that is you have a lot of academics here. You go and ask academics whether they want to have more money. And of course they say, sure, even though we've had these hundreds of studies, give us more money because we'd like to keep studying it even more.
And it's fascinating to read through the report. It's 120, 150 pages long. I can't remember the exact number, but they go through and they talk about gun restrictions and buyback programs and violence in the media and violence in video games. And at the end of all of them, they say, there's just not enough data. We need to study more. You know, to me, it sounds like several people setting themselves up for 20 years of grants from the Centers of Disease Control. Fine. More data, have more data, get it out there, talk about it, make sure that people know the facts. But you've looked at the facts over the years, and the facts are already clear in your mind. Right.
Well, look. You don't need to have government funding for the vast majority of this research. I mean, it's not like we're building cyclotrons. There's lots of crime data that the Department of Justice puts out here, other comparable organizations. Statistics Canada puts out lots of data that's there that many academics have used. So, you know, you have a computer, you get some research assistants, you put the data in the computer, and you run it to see what types of relationships you can find. Yeah, academics.
Go ahead, John.
I mean, academics, that's part of our job as academics to go and do research. The notion that you have to go and pay them additional hundreds of thousands of dollars for each one to go and do a study. I mean, most economists in the United States and universities teach for 6 hours a week. The reason why we teach relatively little is we're supposed to be spending the rest of our time going and doing research.
Well,
and so there's already huge amounts of government.
Let's look at part of the research that you've done, though, on the issue of homicide rates. And this is looking at the issue of, well, does possession of firearms correlate to a higher homicide rate? And you looked at worldwide data and found that no, not necessarily. The Honduras has the highest murder rate, South Africa 36.8, Ethiopia 25.5. These are murders per 100,000. The U.S. is down there at the bottom, 5.4. Canada, 1.8. And as you and I have discussed in the past, there are sub-jurisdictions, so states that border on Canadian provinces where the Canadian provinces, especially Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the states that border them have even lower murder rates than they do. So it doesn't necessarily correlate that more firearms equals more death.
Right. Well, I mean, you look across the United States, about 75% of the counties in the United States have no murders in any given year. About 3% of the counties account for over 70% of the murders. And, you know,
let me just ask you, let me interrupt there. You said 75% roughly have no murders in any given year. Do 75% of those counties have no guns?
Right. Those are the high gun ownership counties. I mean, the 3% of the counties where you have the vast majority of murders, those tend to be urban counties, about 20% of the country's population, but that's where you have the strict gun control. That's where you have lower gun ownership. The suburban and rural counties, those are the ones that have the very high gun ownership rates.
Well, Obama brought forward a couple of new regulations today. They're not going to affect the vast majority of American gun owners, but do you think it's part of a plan to go forward with further regulations in the future?
Well, they're pretty silly rules. You know, the first one sounds really scary, going to ban the importation of military weapons. There's only really one gun that this affects, this rule, and that is the M1 Garand. These were guns that were primarily used in World War II. They're a semi-automatic rifle. They fire about the same size.
It's not going to affect anything. John, we're out of time, apparently. We're going to lose you, so I'll have to let you go there.